Okay, we are talking with Jeff Sutherland, who is the inventor and co-creator of Scrum. The way I first discovered Jeff is I read his book called Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, which of course is something everyone would want to do. Jeff, how you doing today?
Great, doing great.
So I don't at all want to say that the title was misleading because by reading the book, I really did come up with a lot of ideas. But before I ask you a lot of the questions, can you give us the summary on one foot of what Scrum is all about?
Well, when I was working with teams, I had a lot of experience both in the military and then I was a medical school professor and um, wound up working in a large bank, and their teams were having trouble getting stuff finished on time. And I noticed they were doing some of the things that fighter pilots would do when they were early training. They couldn't land the airplane, at the end of the runway, so they had to keep practicing. So I said, you guys can't land a project. I'm gonna show you how to land a project, and we have to do it in short intervals. We have to have small teams. We have to have a clear backlog of what we're going to do that's prioritized by value. And at the end of every week, whatever we're doing needs to be done. And if it's a software, it needs to be live. If it's a sales proposal, it needs to be shipped. Whatever it is, we're going to land it every week, just like an aircraft on an aircraft carrier. And I took the worst business unit in a bank that was losing the most money, and in less than 6 months, it became the most profitable business unit in the bank. That was the first prototype of what we today we call Scrum. Small teams doing things in short iterations, um, clearly prioritizing by what the end user or the customer or the receiver of value wants, and then delivering it consistently over and over again in short time frames.
Okay, so I want to relate that to the way, not that a big company would work, because although I'm sure we have a lot of big company CEOs listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show, I know a lot of normal people listen. And one of the things that you've actually pointed out and you wrote in the book is this concept of looking at the system on a weekly basis so you can constantly readjust or fix things as they go wrong. I often tell people that when I'm talking to them about their own finances. I say, once a week, sit down with your spouse and look at what's going on. Do these same principles apply on the ultra big side as they do in a family unit?
Absolutely. I mean, Scrum works. I mean, families use Scrum working with the children. There's actually a YouTube video on that. Uh, Couples use it for marriages. Startups use it to get going. Large companies, like General Electric or 3M, are using it for, hundreds or thousands of people. One of the interesting things about it is it applies on any scale. But the principle is always the same. Uh, there are certain processes which are unpredictable, and you can't be sure that things are going to happen the way you want them to happen. And that means you have to, in short intervals, inspect and adapt over and over again. And if you do that, you get much better results.
Okay, so one of the counter to that, I think, is what the economist Fama said. He said he's also, I think, won a Nobel Prize. He said that the way to handle money is to look at it like soap, which is the more you touch it, the less you have. So how does that jive with what you're saying? In other words, if people, for example, look at their investment portfolio and they constantly adjust, they're going to be tempted to always sell or buy or move things around. And it sounds to me like that would be a good idea maybe in a business when you're working on a project, but does that apply to your investments as well?
Well, it's interesting because I agree with the Nobel Prize winner. If you move your money around without knowing what you're doing, you're liable to lose money. And but there are some people that make a ton of money. Okay, so if you look at the best traders and watch what they do, they look like the startup CEOs that venture capitalists invest in. They have this incredible vision. They're totally tenacious. They're going to cross the ocean and land on the opposite shore no matter what. But to get there, they need to tack with the wind. They need to change in this direction, then change in that direction. But they're always changing to reach the objective. And you see the great, I read about some of the great traders. They talk about how they feel and how they're thinking, and they feel the pulse and the energy, and they know when to strike, and they consistently make a ton of money. But for the average investor, just changing on a whim, that's a sure way to lose a lot of money.
We're talking with Jeff Sutherland, who is the co-founder and writer of the book about Scrum, which is a fantastic method for managing businesses as well as personal finance. He's also a former fighter pilot, West Point graduate. Jeff, one of the things you're saying, which is very interesting, because a little while back I worked on some research on a book with a world chess champion, a woman named Susan Polgar. And we wrote a book together about how the strategies of chess could be applied to investing. And one of the things I said to her, which is similar to what I'm asking you, is a lot of times people just feel they have to move their pieces on the chessboard. And, you look at a grandmaster and she's moving her chess pieces. And I said, how does that connect with having a bigger strategy? Because you always want to make tactical moves. So maybe you could answer that, which is if you are looking at the big picture of any project or any investment portfolio, which is, for example, I'm trying to invest for the long term so I can retire. How do you control yourself? I think it's more of an emotional question. How do you control yourself so you don't overtrade or over move your pieces?
Right. Well, I think we go back to the world's greatest fighter pilot, John Boyd. And he said when he engaged in combat, somehow he almost went out of himself and had this kind of three-dimensional picture of a great sphere of activity, and these planes move really fast. They can go in and out of sight in a couple of seconds. And from that vantage point, he could observe what was happening in real time. He could position himself and react really fast. And he came up with this idea: observe, orient, decide, and act. And the cycle time of making that action is critical. So I think with a grand chess master, they back up, they have this larger vision of the game that the average person doesn't. And based on their larger vision of what may happen, they orient themselves, they decide what to do, and then they act at a tactical level. And they're doing this very fast. And to the naive user, it looks like they're just, whipping pieces around, but actually it's part of a grand vision they have.
hmm So developing that vision and maintaining it over the long term, I think, is certainly one of the challenges that people have. Now, you've written and you've spoken with thousands of people around the world. One of the problems I would say that I find is a lot of people understand what they should do. They just don't want to do it. They don't want to become more efficient, or they can't get themselves to do it. What do you say? Right? How do you encourage someone to, from simply saving $100 a week to changing the way you run your business? How do you inspire them?
Well, lots of issues in life are kind of like losing weight. You know what you need to do, but it is really difficult to do it, and it requires discipline. So the whole idea of Scrum is to make your objectives really clear and prioritize what you're going to do and make them visible. We get them on a board on the wall with sticky notes, and we're constantly trying to move those sticky notes. We're doing this, and then we're done, and then we do it one by one, and we keep doing it. And so the discipline of organizing and visualizing what you're going to do keeps pulling you back to your goal. And this works for anything, for your goals in life, for your goals of losing weight, for getting the kids to do their chores. Having that visualization, the objective, the prioritization, the constantly refocus, it is critical.
And I think your model of keeping it low tech is also remarkably reasonable, because although I happen to like technology tools, I realize that at the end of the day, if you don't have a simple way of doing it, that you're not relying on all sorts of algorithms and computers, it does exactly what you say, which is to help you to really stick to the discipline of whatever goal you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. And there's something about sticky notes it's physical, it's tactile. the process of grabbing something and moving it registers at a muscle level that, just an intellectual checklist doesn't do.
And I wonder
So
if you own shares of 3M, but you don't have to disclose now.
we don't, but we're actually doing a major agile transition training and coaching at 3M. Unfortunately, I don't own any stock.
All right, listen, Jeff, we got to wrap it up. But tell us in the last few seconds, how can people learn more about Scrum, about the work that you're doing, and follow you?
They can learn about the work we're doing with our clients by going to scruminc.com, scruminc.com. And of course, the best thing they can do is go to Amazon and search for Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time. And they can read a book that some people have said has changed their life.
Yeah, and I will certainly vouch for it. It was a fantastic book, which is in fact how you and I first met because I enjoyed reading it. We will put links to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Jeff Sutherland, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for inviting me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.